In this section, we'll look at the musculoskeletal structures that surround the abdomen. We'll look first at the bones that lie above, behind, and below the abdominal cavity. Then we'll see the layers of muscle and tendon that form the wall of the abdomen. After that, we'll take a detailed look at the lowest part of the abdominal wall, the inguinal region. Lastly, we'll look at the principal blood vessels and nerves of the region. We'll look at the abdomen in this tape as a container, as we did with the thorax. We'll look at what it contains in Volume 5 of this atlas. Let's start with the bones that we're concerned with: the lower ribs, the lumbar vertebrae, and the bones of the pelvis. We're familiar with the rib cage already. The lower edge of the rib cage, formed by the last three ribs and the costal arch, is called the costal margin. Just above the costal margin on the inside, the diaphragm arises, as we've already seen. The diaphragm forms the upper limit of the abdominal cavity. Because of the shape of the diaphragm, the upper part of the abdominal cavity extends a long way above the costal margin. The rib cage is also a major site of attachment for abdominal wall muscles, as we began to see in the last section. The lumbar vertebrae provide the foundation for the posterior part of the abdominal wall. The massive bodies of the vertebrae project forward into the abdominal cavity. Next, we'll take a further look at the bones of the pelvis. For a start, we need to understand something about the word pelvis. The pelvis is commonly used as the short name for two different things: the bony pelvis and the pelvic cavity. This is the bony pelvis, consisting of the sacrum and the two hip bones. This is the pelvic cavity. It's the deep and narrow space that's enclosed by the sacrum, the lower parts of the hip bones, and by ligaments and muscles that we'll see in the next section. The pelvic cavity is continuous with the abdominal cavity here, at the pelvic rim, which we'll return to in a minute. To understand the abdomen, we need to understand the upper and anterior parts of the bony pelvis. We took a good look at the sacrum in the first section of this tape. The only parts of it that we'll mention here are the most anterior part, the promontory, and this broad part, the ala, or wing of the sacrum. Now we need to take a look at some important features of the hip bone. The hip bone is also known as the innominate bone. It develops by the fusion of three originally separate bones: the massive ischium below and behind, the more lightly constructed pubis below and in front, and the broad ilium above. We'll look at the ilium first. The thick lower part of the ilium is the body. The broad expanse of bone that fans out above the body is the ala, or wing of the ilium. The concavity on the inner surface of the ala is known as the iliac fossa. This roughened area, the auricular surface, articulates with the sacrum, forming the sacroiliac joint. The broad roughened edge of the ala of the ilium is the iliac crest. The iliac crest ends behind at the posterior superior iliac spine. It ends in front at this important projection, the anterior superior iliac spine. The iliac crest lies close to the surface all the way along its length. The anterior superior iliac spine is here. Next, we'll look at the pubis. This is the superior pubic ramus. This is the body of the pubis, and this is the ischiopubic ramus. This thick ridge is the pubic crest, which ends at this prominence, the pubic tubercle. Lateral to the tubercle, the superior ramus of the pubis has a sharp upper border called the pecten. The two hip bones are held together in front by a cartilaginous joint, the pubic symphysis. The front of the pubic symphysis is here. The pelvic brim, the narrowing which forms the open end of the pelvic cavity, is made up by the pubic symphysis in front, by the promontory of the sacrum behind, and on each side by the ala of the sacrum, this shoulder on the body of the ilium called the arcuate line, and by the superior ramus of the pubis. The parts of the bony pelvis that lie below the pelvic brim, the ischium and the ischiopubic ramus, don't concern us at present. We'll look at them in the next section. As we've looked at the features of the bony pelvis, we've been seeing them in the position they're in when we're standing upright. It's useful to keep in mind certain basic planes and angles. In the normal standing position, the anterior superior iliac spines and the front of the pubic symphysis are in the same vertical plane when seen from the side. The plane of the pelvic brim is tilted at about 60 degrees to the horizontal. The pelvic surface of the sacrum slopes at 30 degrees to the horizontal. The pubic symphysis is tilted at almost the same angle. It's also useful to keep in mind the distance between the costal margin above and the pelvis below, and the way that distance changes from the front to the side. In front, it's a long way from the xiphoid process down to the pubic symphysis. But at the side, the costal margin and the iliac crest are only this far apart. Now let's review what we've seen of the bones of the abdominal region. Here's the costal margin. Here are the lumbar vertebrae. Here's the ilium, the body of the ilium, the wing of the ilium, the iliac fossa, the iliac crest, the anterior superior iliac spine. Here's the pubis with the superior pubic ramus, the body of the pubis, the ischiopubic ramus, the pubic crest, the pubic tubercle, the pecten, and the pubic symphysis.